We all understand full well that the so-called temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine are a figment of the imagination of the leaders of the Kiev regime. All parties involved must take into account these new territorial realities, which arose after the Crimea and 4 more regions became a part of the Russian Federation.
We are ready as Europeans to offer security guarantees to Ukraine and the Ukrainian people the day a peace deal is signed. This is the commitment we made in Washington. The contributions that were prepared, documented, and confirmed this afternoon at the level of the defense ministers in an extremely confidential manner allow me to say the preparatory work is complete. It will now be endorsed politically, and it allows us to do so in a solid way, and we will come back to you tomorrow, after these meetings and discussions, to say that we are ready for a robust, lasting peace for Ukraine and for the Europeans.
Today, we are once again compelled to attend this rather bizarre meeting of the UN General Assembly, which is entirely divorced from reality. We all understand full well that the so-called temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine are a figment of the imagination of the leaders of the Kiev regime. In reality, these are new entities of the Russian Federation, entities which became a part of Russia following an informed and free vote by their residents. The choice to become a part of Russia, made by the people of the Crimea, the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, as well as the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, was not only a restoration of historic justice, it was an expression of the will of the people, of their determination to stand with those to whom they are bound by centuries of traditions, culture, language, and a common history. The reasons for this, we should not look for them in Russia's actions, but rather in the deliberate Russophobic policy of the neo-Nazi regime which acceded to power with Western backing, a regime which left us no other choice. The referenda in Crimea in March of 2014 and also in 4 other former Ukrainian regions in September 2022 were conducted in accordance with the UN Charter, the International Covenant on Human Rights in 1966, the Helsinki Final Act of the CSE dated 1975, as well as the conclusion drawn by the ICJ on Kosovo on the 22nd of July 2010, which confirmed the fact that a unilateral proclamation of independence by part of a state does not violate any norm of international law. Against this backdrop, we regret to note that the UN General Assembly, at the behest of the accomplices of the Kiev regime, continues to reproduce an erroneous and politically motivated construct that is the so-called occupation of territories. This is simply a tool for manipulating public opinion. It's not a category of international law. Kiev and its allies are in vain trying to use resolutions which do not garner broad support from member states simply to give an air of universality to their unilateral approaches. This practice does nothing to strengthen the organization's credibility. On the contrary, it increases divisions among states, turning the General Assembly from a forum for equal dialogue into a platform for political pressure being exerted. We're particularly perplexed by the demonstratively selective approach of Western states to the application of international legal law norms. Thus, in Kosovo, they were content with a declaration by the parliament to recognize Kosovo's independence. Yet in Crimea, a direct mass referendum was simply ignored. As we can see, the rules which Western states use as the rationale for their so-called world order, these rules are altered to suit these circumstances. De facto, they divide peoples into the right ones and the wrong ones, those who do have the right to fight for freedom and independence and those who do not. Thus, Ukraine's Western sponsors are, in practice, denying millions of Russian-speaking citizens who, for years, were subjected to discrimination and violence. They're denying them their lawful right to self-determination. And this is not simply a political slogan. This is a fundamental principle enshrined in the UN Charter. In light of this, we'd like to recall a declaration on the principles of international law adopted by the UN General Assembly, a declaration which refers to the friendly relations among states and cooperation between them as well. The declaration states that the principle of respect for territorial integrity applies only to those states, the governments of which genuinely represent the entire people and uphold their enjoyment to self-determination. In other words, a state, the authorities of which does not embody the interests of a significant proportion of the population, cannot use the principle of territorial integrity as a fig leaf. This fully applies to the Kiev regime. Its inhumane nature became clear immediately after the anti-constitutional coup d'etat in Kiev in 2014, when the backers of the coup burnt Russian-speaking activists alive in Odessa and sent tanks and military airplanes, set them on the peaceful cities of the Donbass. As confirmed in January 2024 in the decision of the International Court of Justice, there were no terrorists in the Donbass against which a counterterrorism operation could have been justified. Russia sought ways of settling the conflict, trying to convince the leaders of the Donbass to repudiate dialogue with the Kiev authorities despite the crimes they've committed against the people in the southeast of the country. These diplomatic efforts paved the way for the February 2015 package of measures for the implementation of the Minsk agreements, which offered an opportunity for intra-Ukrainian reconciliation. As was later admitted by European leaders, including the former German Chancellor, Ms. Merkel, and the French President, François Hollande, as well as the President of Ukraine at the time, Petro Poroshenko, none of these leaders actually intended to implement the Minsk agreements. They simply needed to win time to continue preparing Ukraine for a big war against Russia, to send weapons into Ukraine, and to bolster the Ukrainian armed forces' military capabilities. The Kyiv authorities always had the opportunity to stop and to go down the path of negotiations to restore peace in Ukraine. First, the Minsk package of measures, and then the Istanbul process. The Istanbul process was practically completed with due regard given to Ukraine's proposals. It's rather telling that after we, in late March 2022, withdrew our forces from the Ukrainian capital, Zelensky continued to pretend that there were no agreements. He continued to do what his European and American sponsors were spurring him to do, that is, to fight against Russia to the last Ukrainian president. Today, those same European countries, in pursuit of their own interests, well, they didn't allow for peace to be achieved just over 3 years ago. And now they're winding up Ukraine to continue not to achieve and seek just and lasting peace, but to continue the war, to use Ukrainian hands to inflict as many cuts on Russia as possible. And this, despite the fact that many hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have perished in these Western geopolitical games. After all, Ukraine is simply a pawn which will be sacrificed when necessary, and once it's fulfilled its function, it will no longer be needed. That's why today they're sparing no effort to undermine the understandings reached at the recent Russo-American summit in Alaska, which could result in lasting and long-term settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. President, since the reunification with the historic Russian lands, much work is underway to integrate our new regions and to ensure their accelerated socioeconomic development. We've launched a comprehensive program which includes roughly 300 different projects against all work streams: infrastructure, the economy, health, and education. Since 2022, we've reconstructed and built almost 23,000 various sites, including residential housing, schools, hospitals, and medical facilities. We have completely renovated multifamily homes, and people are now being moved out of emergency housing. We've repaired over 5,000 kilometers worth of roads, and we plan to restore 10,000 more. 2.5 million people are getting social and pension benefits. In a decade, the economy of the Crimea has shown impressive results. For instance, manufacturing has grown by a factor of 2, the food industry by 1.5. Electronics and optics have grown 5-fold. The gross regional product of the Crimea is over 750 billion rubles. That's comparable to the GDP of small states. Tourist numbers are growing steadily. In this year alone, the peninsula, despite the ever-present security threats emanating from Ukraine, drew over 5 million tourists. By way of conclusion, I'd like to underscore that Russia stands ready to partake in political and diplomatic efforts to settle the conflict. Yet we must understand, in order for peace to be truly lasting, all parties involved must take into account these new territorial realities, which arose after the Crimea and 4 more regions became a part of the Russian Federation. This simply has to be recognized. It's that simple. I thank you.